Namaste, and welcome to this second talk in the series that I've called Worlds of Words, indicating the idea that as far as linguistic Kabbalism or linguistic mysticism is concerned, the mystic can enter and will enter words that will then offer the opportunity to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So as such, a specific word can open itself up and from its most literal meaning lead one to deeper understandings that really to the Kabbalist feel like different worlds, hence the title of the series. In this specific talk, I would like to talk a little bit about the word for tables, the Hebrew word for tables. Not necessarily the table on which we put our cup of coffee in the morning, even though, of course, Kabbalistically, everything is based on the text and everything is based on the numbers. So, as such, also the table on which we put our cup of coffee. The specific tables I'm thinking of are the tables on which the Ten Commandments were written. In Hebrew, the word is luchot. So, we're talking about luchot. That is, I'm talking about luchot. Now, the idea is also because of the foundational world of words, that words always contain deeper layers, as I said. Now, in the case of the Ten Commandments that were written on two tables of stone, the idea is that God wrote those commandments, him, her, themselves, with the finger. Now, this, of course, is the image layer of the text. It's the layer that in Kabbalah is often called the layer of understanding, which is the third sephira from above, meaning there are other layers, there are other ways of dealing with life, dealing with texts, and also dealing with the Torah in general. As such, the word luchot itself will already contain everything that can be said in the Ten Commandments that were written on the two tables, the two stone tables. Now, we can learn this in many different ways. So one way, of course, Kabbalistically, is looking at the numbers. Another way is looking at the opening and the final letters of words. Another way is looking at words as acronyms, in which every single letter refers to something else. All these things are, of course, linguistic. So we're really inside the text here, and we're looking at words as doors of perception. To me, this is interesting because I've experienced exactly the same thing in the context of Hindu temples, where you travel, of course, in a completely different framework. But the idea is the same. There you would go, there being in India, you would go to a temple, opening up to the temple, as in emptying out oneself in order to be able to receive the word in Hebrew, which is Kabbalah. And when that moment comes, also it feels like other worlds open up. In the case of the Hindu temples, one can feel why the specific images of the deities are in the places they are. Why are they to the right or to the left of the main deity? What is the entire setup? What feeling does the temple give you? And as such, one can learn more about the temple, about the mythology of the temple, and about oneself, of course, in a wider context as well. Now, the same holds true for Kabbalistic words. So, in the sense of the word luchot, like I said, one can look at the entire temple, entire word, and that will give you information about the details of the temple as well, and the details of your own life in a similar setting. Now, in the case of the word luchot, written with the Hebrew letters lamed, vav, chet, vav, tav, that gives us a specific numerical value, of course, because the Hebrew letters have numerical values like Arabic letters have numerical values. And that's the base for linguistic Kabbalism, so linguistic mysticism. One looks at the letters that are seen as the base for the things in phenomenology, and the letters have as their base the numbers. The numbers as their base have the not numbers. It's hard to put a word on to put a word on that really. So in the case of luchot, the numbers of the letters respectively are 30, 6, 8, 6, and 400. Which means that the total numerical value, also called the gematria in Hebrew, the total numerical value of the word luchot, tables, is 430. 450. This already tells us basically everything we need to know about the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, hence, being a more detailed expression of the number that is their source. The number of the words that form the sentences of the Ten Commandments, but also the number of the word itself, the luchot, the tables that contain the Ten Commandments. So the number 450 in this sense is seen as the source of everything. So one has to remember that as in reality as we have it, extra textual reality, things have different layers. We can look at life as a story, which in the context of Kabbalah would be sipur, the story layer of life. But when we can go deeper and see that beyond just the story layer, often opinionated story layer, there are other layers. So in Kabbalah, the first step upward, if there's such a thing as upward, maybe inward, would be the numbers. The numbers, time-related elements, as in they can either transport us beyond time, or they can explain things about time itself. The numbers in that sense are numbers as we know them, sequential numbers. And that's the layer above the letters. The numbers that are through numerical values are connected to the letters. Now above that, like I called it, we have the non-numbers, really the numbers as the source, dynamic beings. In Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, these numbers are called the living numerical beings. And a few of their characteristics are that they are without meaning, without substance, without end. So it's not really the numbers as we know them. They're like living powers that in the book of Ezekiel, for example, are described as the chariot, the throne chariot. So back to the numbers. The numbers as being contained in nothingness, then the numbers as sequences, then the letters that are the expression of those numbers, and then the things in phenomenology that in Kabbalah are only the results, the outer result, the last result of the dynamic numbers. So in the case of the number 450 of luchot, of the tables, it's the number itself that is the power, and not so much the number as it can be grasped, but the number in its non-number entity. Now the number 450 has another expression, and that's a word that is well known in Kabbalah, which is Sheva. Now Sheva is called the influx, often as a description of the power that comes down into the text when a Kabbalist is interacting with the living text. So that power can be called the chi in another cultural setting. It can be called the life force. It is the force that throws through the channels in between the so-called sephirot, the divine emanations. You can hear sephirot. You can hear in that word. It's based on the root sefer, which is the root for both story, sipur, but also mispar, number. There's already in the sephirot, the name of sephirot, you can hear the root of this idea. So when the 10 sephirot, so the 10 divine emanations that are powers of creation, but also powers one can use as a kind of ladder to return to the original force, the life force, when they're all balanced out, when they're in their proper place, meaning when everything is understood in its right way, and when there's no distortion coming from the ego that projects onto reality, when one's open and empty and can receive, then the Sheva, this power, flows unobstructedly. Nothing is blocked. And one experiences what is called simchat chayim, so the joy of life, much closer to happiness, as for example the Dalai Lama talks about it, the art of happiness, much closer affiliated with that than enjoyment. Enjoyment is usually related to the fulfillment of specific wishes. Happiness is really a completely different state of consciousness. So when the Sheva flows unobstructedly, it means everything is in a state of equanimity, everything is a state of goodness, and there is happiness, unlimited happiness, like the Sephirot themselves are unlimited. So this is really what's contained already in the word luchot. So luchot, the tables with the 10 commandments, the idea of the flow, the divine flow, is already contained in the number that is the source of this word. And as such, the commandments, the 10 commandments written with the finger or by the finger of God onto those stone tables, the luchot, are not moralistic statements. They can be read like that on the story level, on the sipur, the story level of things, so the most superficial level of understanding of creation. But really, because the number talks about the flow of the life force, it is more about, they're more about statements that tell you how things are. So there are 10 of them, 10 commandments, like the 10 sayings with which, according to the Torah, the world was created, and according to the 10, of course, numbers and the 10 sephirot. So all these things are aligned. There are different expressions of the same things. Now, the idea hence is that when it's stated, thou shalt not kill, for example, one of the 10 commandments, it's not so much that that's a moralistic statement, even though almost everybody agrees with that statement. It's not so much moralistic, it's more that one looks at the words that are used to make this statement, at the letters, at the numbers, etc. Really, the statement exposes a specific perspective of reality. And the idea is that if one can align with this statement, then nothing is blocked in the framework of the tree of life, the 10 Sephirot, meaning there's happiness for everybody. Hence, not doing as is suggested by these commandments doesn't necessarily lead to punishment. That's not the idea. The idea is this is how things are. These are the 10 powers that we're working with that are prevalent in and that are the source, the living source of everything that happens in creation. If we can align ourselves with that, then everything flows and there's no violence, which is a massive thing to understand and to live. Now the word luchot, for example, like I said, one can also look at the beginning and the opening letters for various reasons. One of the reasons being that in Sefer Yetzirah it's stated that their beginning is embedded in their end and vice versa. As in the beginning is embedded in the end. Life and death are really one. They cannot really be taken separately. One cannot say life ends and death begins. Life flows forth from death. Death follows upon life. The creator deity is also the deity of death, as one can see, for example, in India as well, with the creator deity and deity of death, Shiva, mostly known as the deity of death, but definitely also known as the deity of creation. As such, when one looks at the word luchot, again the tables, one can look at the first and the last letter as kind of boundary stones of this concept, boundary stones of life. Now the first letter is the lamet with the numerical value 30, last letter the tav with the numerical value 400. Together 430. So now we've moved from the 450, sorry, to the 430. 450 entire numerical value, 430 just the beginning and the end, something that contains something. Like the word for heart, lev in Hebrew contains the entire Torah, the first letter being the beit, and the last letter of Deuteronomy being the lamet. So as such, those two letters lamet and tav of luchot, of the tables, and embrace, encompass the entire concept. Now these two letters together have the numerical value of 430. And here again we see that one number can express the beginning and the end. Also according to that concept of numbers that are not numbers, numbers that give a sequence, and numbers that link us to letters and hence to meaning and hence to the more meaningful, if you want to use that word, meaningful understanding of life. Life understanding to meaning and not understanding to numerical values or understanding according to nothingness, which are different concepts. So the word nefesh is one of the expressions of the numerical value 430, formed by the first and the last letters of the stone tables, luchot. Now nefesh means soul. It's the most bodily soul. And in Sefer Yetzirah, we have 5 souls in Kabbalah. In Sefer Yetzirah, this soul is sometimes used as a denotation of the spiritual dimension, sometimes also used in order to denote the concept of chaos and void. Chaos and void, tohu ve Bohu from Genesis 1, denoting the 42 lettered name that really expresses creation. So in that sense, Nefesh also expresses the manifestation of creation as we have it. Something that only happens when the 10 Sefirot are unblocked, because the 10 Sefirot can be the tree of life, the 10 Sefirot can be looked upon basically in two directions. So the one direction is a creational direction from 1 to 10, in which everything unfolds and everything becomes more and more material, the most material being, again, the closest to the most spiritual, which is an interesting concept as well. The tree of Sefirot can also be looked at in a different directions, from our state, our world, to the so-called source. And in that way, Malchut, the last Sephira usually, is the first Sephira. So we have two ways of understanding the tree of life. We have two ways of understanding life in general, and two ways of looking at texts. So we can either see them as the expression of creation, as often the book of Genesis is being read, or we can see it as a way back, like I said, a kind of ladder back to the unison with God. Now the 42 lettered name, sealed by the words Tohu Ve Bohu, is such a name. Also can be looked upon as the unfolding of the deity, can also be looked upon as a return to the Godhead. Return, lahashiv, very close to Shiva. So also here you have the concept of going through Shiva, going through mystical death, if one will, in order to come to a deeper understanding of the different layers of reality that exist at the same time. Now, Tohu Vebohu, so the final imprint of the 42 lettered name in Genesis, also has the numerical value 430, like Nefesh, like the soul. Now, Nefesh, like I said, can be the most bodily soul, it can also be the most mystical state, because Nefesh as a noun, soul, is once used in the Torah as a verb, v'yinafesh, and he sold. And he sold has the same numerical value as death. As such, to soul as a verb is close to experiencing mystical death, which of course is part of the return, the second direction with which one can look at the tree of life. Now, those are two different understandings of the number 430. A last way of understanding the number 430 is to look at the root shekel. Shekel, the root of mishkal, weight. So here again, the first and the last letters of the word luchot, the tables that I'm talking about, the tables on which the 10 commandments are written, the first and the last letters, the boundary stones, also teach us about weight. So mishkal, very much a word for physical weight, the weight of physical things, and hence expressing things on a more on the level of phenomenology, but at the same time teaching us again about the 10 commandments written on those two stones. Now, the idea is again, like I said, to align with the commandments, not to follow them because one is afraid that if one does not do that, punishment will follow, but as a way to become freer. So understanding every single sentence of those 10 sentences that form the commandments, the 10 Noachide commandments, what one does is through one's life, through living and learning and living and learning and living, one adjusts oneself. And through this adjustment, in a kabbalistic understanding, one changes one's own energetical charge. That's the mishkal. So that's the charge, the weight, one's soul weight, if you will, that one can work on and change. That's the learning. That's spiritually learning, letting go, and adjusting. So hence, that is also implied in the first and the last letters of the word luchot, of the 10 commandments. By adjusting one's own weight, according to the weight, that is the numerical value, the gematria of specific words or specific sentences that are part of the 10 commandments, can one come to the same level and as such resonate with them, and as such become freer and become less violent. Because in the end, that's what Kabbalah is about. It's just about changing oneself to become less of an I and more of an all, really. Now, The opening of doors. That's what I started with. The opening of doors. In this sense, it is already clear. I talked about the total gematria of the word luchot, the tables, 450, the influx. I've talked about the first and the last letters, the lamet and the tav, that together form 430 of soul, of souling, of chaos and void, of mystical weight, energetic weight. Um, every time you take a little step in whatever direction, kabbalistically, other doors open around you. So it's not so much that one enters a word in the sense of only mentally. Of course, you do it mentally. But what happens, it's very visual. So when one studies the text according to the Kabbalistic standard of Lishma for its own sake, not with ulterior motives, not to become more holy or to become more knowledgeable, but purely to have that dynamic moment with the text itself, something that is not done to be grasped, to be held onto, or anything like that. When one enters the text like this, doors open and it's visual, like I said. So you're looking, you're on a new landscape. Every time you use a new concept, so for example, when I'm thinking of the Ten Commandments, I know as a fact that there are 630 letters that form that piece of text. Now 613 in Kabbalah is huge because it's also the number of all the commandments, for example. So there are 10 main commandments, but in Judaism there are 613 in total. So the word 613 is hence also linked to the number of letters. When you look at that, Kabbalistically, you're in a new landscape and new portals are there, new openings appear in front of your eyes, new worlds can be discovered. So it's an exercise that's very alive, and it is the mystical experience of the Kabbalist. The learning, or it's not so much the learning because that entails holding on to knowledge, but letting go, I guess, through studying, letting go of the I, and hence becoming bigger and bigger, and partaking more of that joy of life, happiness. So I think I will stop now. In future talks, I could talk about more about the 613, for example, or the fact that in those 630 letters, only one letter is missing. So the 630 letters that form the Ten Commandments contain all the 21 of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but one. And the one letter that is missing is the tet, which has the numerical value 9, which is linked to the ninth Sephira, and through that linked to Shiva, the Shaivite understanding of life. So here again, a whole new world opens up with lots of interesting implications and landscapes and portals to be entered. But this is for another time. Thank you for listening. I hope this was interesting and have a lovely day. Namaste.